Welcome back, and joining me now for the legislative response to Governor Florio's State of the State message are three men who were in key positions in the Senate and the Assembly during Florio's term. Assembly Speaker Chuck Haytaian and Senate Majority Leader John Bennett are two Republicans who were often at odds with the governor, but who also worked with him on some initiatives. And Assembly Minority Leader Doria often found himself in agreement with the governor, but sometimes in opposition to initiatives where Florio and the Republicans were working together. Senate Democrats were unable to send a participant for tonight's program, but I thank the three of you for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, you are the ranking member here, so we'll start with you. Did you think the governor's remarks today were a thinly veiled attack on the governor-elect's pledge to roll back taxes, and the implication here being that if you roll back taxes too much, your property taxes are going to go up?
Oh, I hope not. I'm not sure what the governor was doing in his speech today. I thought it was a good speech. Let me start off by saying that. But I don't think it had any relevance. In fact, at one point, the governor started talking about Governor Cahill's term. And he said at that time there were very high property taxes. And he said there was no income tax. And he said that was a time that people didn't believe in the income tax. And he said, now we have the income tax. And I tried to extrapolate what he was saying, and I came to a conclusion that Jim Florio didn't understand what he was saying, quite frankly, because now we have a 7% income tax, and we still have high property taxes. What the governor doesn't understand and never got during his 4 years was that you got to cut expenditures in order to cut property taxes. You also have to increase municipal aid and aid to education, which we've done in the last 2 years. You know, Jim Florio's way of reducing property taxes was to increase taxes overall, $2.8 billion. I don't understand that for New Jersey, and I'll tell you, most New Jerseyans don't understand that.
Well, let me ask Mr. Doria this question. I noted earlier tonight on our newscast when you spoke with Michael Aaron, you said you'd wish the governor had given this speech 3 years ago. But what about the point that the speaker just made, that taxes did go up, but property taxes are still high?
Well, property taxes are still high, but they're not increasing at the double-digit level they did during the 1980s. During the 1980s, we had significant state surpluses, but there was no state cap. So at the state level, we were spending more and more, but at the local level, the property taxes kept on going up because we weren't providing additional state aid in the area of education or municipal aid. I think that the whole crux of today's speech by the governor was really to crystallize what we considered the Democratic Party as a primary concern of ours during the past 4 years, and that is to try to stabilize property taxes. During the period from 1991 to the present, property taxes have increased at a very low rate, in many instances 1 or 2%, in some instances in 1991 and 92, as a result of what was done in 1990 and the addition of over $1 billion in aid for education and municipalities. Property taxes have stabilized. The present Republican legislature has continued that trend by continuing the funding for the municipal revitalization program and school aid. But it was a step taken in 1990 that has moved on from there. There's no question that what the speaker said about decreasing expenditures is very important. But at the same time, the important thing is the additional aid. And if we don't continue to provide additional aid to municipalities, if we don't continue to provide additional aid to school districts, property taxes are going to increase at that double-digit rate. I think that's what the governor was talking about. That's the concern. Property taxes and the fact that we cannot allow property taxes, probably the most regressive and onerous tax, the one that impacts upon everyone. Income tax is bad, sales tax is bad, but if you own a piece of property or if you rent your home, property taxes will impact upon you because you're going to have an increase. During the 1980s, 100% or better in 9 years.
So you're saying that things slowed down during the Florio years. This afternoon, Senator Bennett, right after our live broadcast, you said that you thought Governor Florio was going to be remembered for increasing his taxes. But what about the point here that the minority leader just made, that, okay, he did increase the income tax, but the trade-off on that was that your property tax rates, they didn't increase as much during his tenure in office?
Not during his first 4 years, but he laid seeds for some increases in 1995 due to the Quality Education Act, and the way the funding and the surplus had to be utilized and borne down by many of the suburban municipalities. They are not going to be able to have that money after the 4-year program. That's going to result in substantial increases in property taxes unless alternative methods of fundings are found. Some of the municipalities I represent are looking at 20-cent increases in '95 for property taxes unless we're able to reverse those seeds which were done under the 4-year plan of the Quality Education Act. So I think that when he talked today about property taxes, he talked about something that he was able to accomplish statewide with other taxes going up, and so that the people in the state were paying overall more taxes in a varying diversity and putting blinders on to the fact that we really weren't doing the things necessary to protect the future and the future of taxes in the state. It was a short-term solution. We put some Band-Aids on, and we really didn't get to the serious problem.
So now what you're saying is that there's going to be some bleeding? Or there could be some?
I'm saying that what we need to do is to go back and address ourselves to those problems as to what causes those taxes going up. We put a constitutional amendment on which the voters voted to take the court system, for instance, off of the backs of the property taxes through the counties having to pay for it and having the state pick it up. That was a significant one step to be able to do it. The President DeFrancisco today in his address talked about the state mandate, state pay, and not passing off the costs from state government to the local municipalities of programs. I think that they're important concepts for us to be able to get down to, concepts that we've been working on and haven't been able to do, but I think now with the cooperation of the Chief Executive with the legislature and not being pitted against one another, that we're going to be able to get to the root of some of those problems and work together as we should work together.
Well, state mandate, state pay has been passed by the Assembly twice, when I was Speaker and when Chuck Haytaian was Speaker. In both instances, the Senate has not acted upon it. I'm surprised now it's a priority, given the fact that it has passed twice, both with Democratic leadership and Republican leadership. I'm very hopeful that we move on that, because that is important, and it's something I've been very supportive of over the years, and I know the Speaker has. Unfortunately, the Senate leadership has not been supportive, and I'm happy to hear the Senate President finally is going to move in that direction.
But what about this accusation that what Jim Florio did was short-sighted?
No, well,
and it may have taken care of problems for the first 4 years, but now there's this little bomb ticking.
Well, let me just say something. When you talk about property tax increases related to school aid, what was done with the QEA, and I was one of the sponsors of the QEA, what was done was, as a result of the requirements of the court and the area of minimum aid, a lot of those districts that Senator Bennett is talking about are districts that were minimum aid districts that cannot, under the constitutional mandate, continue to receive aid, not by a decision of the legislature, but by a decision of the court, so that there is going to be an impact upon those various school districts. But those school districts, and I think all of us have to agree, one of the biggest problems we have in the state, and the governor hit it directly today, is the fact that we have 611 school districts, more than Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia put together. Those districts, many of them are minimum aid districts. We have to begin to create some type of innovative solutions to deal with voluntary regionalization. The same thing with municipalities, 567. I mean, the problem here is not a problem of creation of the Democratic administration or the Democratic legislature when we were in power. Those are problems that are intrinsic and are structural within the system we have in New Jersey. Well, so that we've done a lot in the area of providing additional aid and stabilizing caps. The use of caps has something that's going to help.
Let me ask the Speaker now about this regionalization issue that the governor raised again today, and that the minority leader just raised, and that is, aren't there too many school districts out there? Couldn't municipalities start sharing some of their services within each other? Wouldn't this help save money? And is this something that, an idea that maybe the Republican legislature and the new governor-elect should take up?
Larry, we started that a few years ago under Chuck Hardwick when he was Speaker of the Assembly. I had task force out, and when I was minority leader, we had task force out on the sharing of municipal services. That's not new. We have reports on it. The problem that we have is 567 municipalities, 611 school districts. All of us, I'm sure, would be in favor of regionalization, to consolidate municipalities and school districts. Try to do it politically. Try to do it with home rule concept in New Jersey. New Jersey is a home rule state. Very, very, very difficult to implement that. I think we'd all agree that it's time to look at regionalization in schools. It's got to be voluntary. You can't force it.
That's right.
Once you start forcing it, all hell will break loose. And no one can afford that, regardless of whether there's another election around the corner or not.
All right, well then while we're on the subject of education, we could very well find out this week, tomorrow, there could be a recommendation as to how the commission that's been charged with coming up with a solution for suggesting ways to fund New Jersey's educational system in light of the state Supreme Court mandate that says less wealthy districts have to be brought up to the level of parity with wealthier districts. Just how are you going to tackle that in light of this tax reduction pledge that Christy Whitman is talking about? What happens if they come through and come up with an expensive proposal?
Let them come up with an expensive proposal. Quite frankly, the governor-elect
Or if
has
the
said,
courts do.
Well, the governor-elect has said that you must look at the priorities that you have in education. I don't believe this funding commission will come up with that type of formula. They're realists. They understand the kind of economic situation we have. We're not out of the recession totally. I think the economic signs are much better than they were 3 years ago. I think we're starting to build on those economic indicators. Revenues are starting to come in. You know, you mentioned earlier about the 80s, and Joe mentioned it, that during the 80s we had great times. We had monies, we had surplus. We also spent a lot of money. $6.2 billion budget went up to $12.4 billion budget. Everyone was at fault. The governor, the legislature, we could all take the fault for it. We didn't look for a rainy day. We should have been looking for a rainy day then. And you know, it's all a matter of legacy. Everybody wants to be remembered. And meanwhile, we didn't have the caps. We spent a lot of money. That's why I say it's expenditures in state government that we must be looking to. If you don't cut the expenditures, you're not going to reduce property taxes. You're not going to reduce the other taxes. You'll never have enough money for education.
All right,
so that's where the priorities are.
All right, well, let's look ahead a little bit here before we go back and look at what the governor is talking about. And let's look ahead to the next governor, her pledge to roll back the income tax 30% over 3 years and a couple of other business taxes. Senator Bennett, there was in Senator DeFrancesco's remarks today his wholehearted pledge of support for the governor. But prior to the remarks in a meeting with reporters, he said maybe we should wait for 6 months rather than doing it right away. Are we seeing a little split in the Republican family here as to how this tax rollback should be achieved?
No, we're not seeing any split at all. What we heard today, and I think he even qualified it by saying, I want to make it perfectly clear to everyone as to what the position is of the Senate. That the Senate is going to be receiving the message from the governor-elect as she becomes the governor. We're going to receive her program, we're going to review her program, and he is going to do every step possible to see that that program is enacted by the Senate. We are not equivocating, we are not backing down, we are committed to
But is it going to be January instead of June?
I think once we get the governor and her advisors and the cabinet in place, and we get everyone to be giving us that input, we're in a position to answer that even clearer. The governor's position stays the way that it is, and the cabinet and the people that are advising, we're going to be working together as a team. The Assembly, the Senate, the executive branch, the minority, we're extending out to have them. Christie called all the leaders of both parties together from the legislature to get around the table to start a communication. I think that was a healthy start. It was a good beginning. We're going to work together, and we're going to see to it that the governor and the Senate and the Assembly are going to be able to implement those programs and live through to the commitments that were made in the state. And when we have everyone together, that's how we're going to be able to do it.
All right, well,
the time frame, I'm not going to get hung up on a time frame. I think that the commitment is that we're going to do it, and that's what the president has said.
Well, you're saying you're not going to get hung up on a time frame. Aren't you saying the sooner the better, Mr. Speaker? Like,
well,
could you go along with delaying the first rollback till next January?
When you say, could I go along, my caucus is in favor of reducing taxes on the income tax 10% a year for 3 years, starting in June. I believe that's what the governor-elect will propose. I'm telling you, and John's telling you, and I'm sure the people in New Jersey understand that we must wait for her proposal.
Right.
If she says January, then we will talk January. But I doubt that. I think she's going to talk June, because she has a year and a half, 6 months of Jim Florio's budget, plus a full year of her budget. Christy Whitman is going to be lucky. I predict she's going to be lucky. Economic indicators are going up. Our economy is going to grow. We're going to create jobs. We're going to see revenues coming in. Our problem is revenue shortfall. And if we can cut expenditures, we'll be in good shape.
All right, let me ask the minority leader here, Joe Doria. What is going to be the Democratic role in this whole process here? I mean, are you going to, I heard you say earlier, or I guess it was last week, you said, I don't know how she's going to do it without really cutting deeply into programs.
What our role is going to be, we're going to try to work cooperatively with the majority and with the governor-elect, and we're going to try to see what we can do to help deal with the process. I think no one likes to pay taxes. Everyone likes to see a tax cut. Our concern is that we have to look at those proposals, just as the Speaker said and Senator Bennett said. We have to look at what the proposals are, see how they're presented, what impact they will have on property taxes, because that's our biggest concern. We don't want to push down the taxes down to the next level, down to the counties, down to the municipalities. If we're going to cut the income tax, we want the people to really save the money and not just have to, save the money at the state level and then pay it at the local level. So that's our concern. Our concern is how that's going to impact on state services. But we will be very supportive of the tax cut, and we will be looking forward to working with her on that. But again, the issue has to be what is presented, how it's going to be implemented. Until we see what's proposed, and I think all of us realize that, and how it's going to impact on all the other areas, I said it's not going to be easy, because the governor-elect has said she does not want to increase property taxes, which I'm happy to hear. She has said she doesn't want to impact upon state workers. I'm happy to hear that also. But obviously, it's difficult to do what she says she wants to do with a structural deficit of approximately $1 billion, plus another 500 and some odd million dollars as a result of the income tax cut. That's $1.5 billion. Not easily done in a $15 billion budget when over half of that budget goes back in state aid, whether it be municipal aid or school aid. That was my question. I hope she can do it. We're going to try to work with her to do it, but it's not an easy task, and I don't think anyone will say it's an easy task.
All right, well, let me ask the two ranking Republicans that are with us tonight. Christy Whitman has already said that the homestead rebate, I think, is off limits. I think she said that aid to municipalities and school aid, that's off limits. Last week up in Newark, she said that aid for programs that benefit children with AIDS, that's also going to be off limits. Are either of you getting nervous with all of these things that she's talking about that are saying off limits, and still being able to come up with the areas where you're going to be able to cut that money? If those items are off limits, where do you cut?
You got a $15 billion budget, $15.4 billion budget right now, Larry. You're talking about the homestead rebate is $365 million. You talk about municipal aid, it's about $1.3 billion, I guess.
Yeah, right now.
So now you add those two together, you're talking about 1/8 of the budget, 1/6 of the budget. I mean,
But your own Revenue, Finance, and Appropriations Committee chairman is I've seen it in print anyway, where he has said, I wish that everything was on the table. She's putting too many things that are off the table.
Well, I think you must understand, and Rodney is a fine Appropriations Committee chairman. He does a good job for me, and I appreciate the job he does. But it's the caucus that decides on what direction we take. We will wait for the governor-elect's budget, which comes out on March 15th, to speculate now at this early date as to which way we're going to go, whether we're going to have the wherewithal. No one believed we could cut $1.1 billion from the governor's proposed budget 2 years ago. No one believed we could roll back sales tax. No one believed we could cut out another $200 million. We accomplished that. The parks didn't close. 10,000 people didn't get laid off. New Jersey Transit, by the way, we cut them $30 million. We should have cut them 60, because what we effectuated was a better run transit system that was on time, that had a 4% increase in ridership, and has no rate increase or fare increase for the last 3 years.
No.
And what we did was we found out through the audits that there were some problems in some of the monies and how it was being spent. What we need is good accountability in education, good accountability in every line item. And you know what? She'll know through her commissioners where the money is, where the bodies are, where every nook and cranny is, and we'll go line item by line item. We've done it already.
All right,
We've shown we can do it. Joe Doria will help us do it. He'll be glad to do it because Joe will be reelected also if we start cutting taxes. He doesn't like to pay taxes. He admits that. I do too. People don't want to pay taxes in New Jersey. They'd like to get all their services, but they really don't want to pay taxes.
All right, Senator Bennett, are the people that you talk to in your house, Bob Littell, the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, is he nervous about some of these things that Mrs. Whitman has said that are off limits?
No, we're not nervous at all. As the Speaker said, we're a legislature that has shown that we can do the cuts, and we did the cuts with an executive branch of government that fought us kicking and screaming every step of the way. To have an executive branch that we're going to be able to work with, to be able to go in there like Governor Weld did in Massachusetts, where he was able as an executive with a legislative branch that was contrary to him and cut $3 billion in his first term, we can do it. We will be able to do it in a cooperative effort, and the state of Massachusetts hasn't grind to a halt. There are positive actions that have been done in those states because you have an executive branch has the ability to be able to get in there. We tried to get at some of those middle bureaucratic areas where there's duplication of services. We tried. And they took us to court, and we weren't able to be successful in designating specifically where those cuts were going to come from, where the people in duplication of services. But now it's a different story. And a cooperative effort between the legislative branch and the executive branch, I believe, can produce an even greater savings than we were able to do with an executive branch fighting us. We did $1.2 billion of cuts in his proposed budget. We're experienced in doing it, and we can do it again.
Mr. Doria, as far as the Democratic perspective is concerned?
My perspective is that we want to try to cooperate and work totally with the majority and with the governor-elect. I don't think it's going to be as easy as the Speaker and Senator Bennett are stating. I think that it may be done, but I think there's going to have to be people who realize that services are going to be impacted. You know, we talk about the aid to municipalities and we talk about homestead rebates, but when you add school aid to that, that's that's right now $4.95 billion. So right there, those two together, you're up to almost half the budget. So that's the school aid is a significant portion of this whole proposal. The other thing is we have a structural deficit that results from a number of the one-time revenue raises that we've done in the last few years. You know, we began, the Democrats, and I'll take full credit for this, we began by selling a road. But not only did we sell a road, the last 2 years we refunded the pensions, we refunded the state debt, we speeded up the collection of the gross receipts tax. There's been a lot of little gimmicks that have been used by both Republicans and Democrats with the Democratic administration in bad economic times. That money now will not be there. So we're not only talking about a $500 million decrease as a result of an income tax decrease, and we're not talking about how much the telecommunications tax decrease would impact. We're also talking about that structural deficit. It's not going to be as easy as it seems. It's going to be difficult. We're all going to have to work together. The people of the state are going to have to realize that there are going to be proposals that are going to impact on services, whether it's privatization, whether it's, for example, the whole question of motor vehicle inspections privatizing. Great idea, except people in New Jersey don't pay when they have an inspection. They may have to pay in the future. I myself would not like to see that, but it may happen, and it may happen because it's a means of saving money.
Okay, all right. We're jumping the gun on Christy Whitman's term, and I think we can come back and do this again when she does her budget message and again after. I want to go back in the remaining time that we have here for this program and talk about Jim Florio and his legacy now. Mr. Speaker, how do you think history is going to judge Jim Florio? How do you think he's going to be remembered?
I think history will remember Jim Florio as a great campaigner, a person who can get his message out but couldn't govern very well because he didn't have the experience in governing. He was always a legislator. All his life he was a legislator. And he got into the administrative branch of government and truly didn't surround himself with good enough people early on. Joe had a very difficult time. I admired Joe Doria when he was Speaker because he was fighting the bureaucrats around Jim Florio. They didn't know what they were doing. Joe Doria knew what had to be done, but he couldn't get his way. And so I admire what he tried to do. They didn't do it right because legislators can't do it alone. They need the administrative branch. So I think he's going to be remembered as a person who campaigned very well, got a message out, but couldn't govern very well.
Senator Bennett, same question.
Okay, I think he'll be remembered, right, wrong, or indifferent, for those taxes that were done in the first term in the beginning. The way that he did it, probably more so than the taxes themselves, and people are going to remember that. I think, though, at the end of the term, and today in the speech, a significant thing was done, and it was kind of passed over, was the commitment that the executive order that he signed either yesterday or today with respect to the state plan. There are few legislators that have more staunchly supported the state plan in the state than John Bennett. I'm concerned, though, of the ramifications of taking an action that this governor did with 1 week to go in a term that can do talk about property tax and property tax problems, the coordinations of the ramifications of signing an executive order to say that everything has to go through that master plan. We have roads that are being constructed right now, committed to be constructed. We have wastewater treatment plants that municipalities are building. My understanding is that under the terms of this executive order are so far-reaching that, in fact, we may have to turn around and have people have property taxes pay for projects that would have to have been done with the state coordination of funds.
So you're concerned that he may have left something ticking here for future
I think
generations?
it may be remembered as one of the most irresponsible acts of his administration, if what I understand is true.
All right, I have to cut you off there just for time purposes. Joe Doria, how do you think Jim Florio is going to be remembered?
I think that Jim Florio will be remembered as a governor who was not afraid to make decisions, who was not maybe the best politician in the world, but definitely knew policy and cared about people, who wanted to lower property taxes and worked very hard to do that, who wanted to improve quality education and worked very hard to do that, who worked hard to keep our shores clean, who wanted to try to develop in the state of New Jersey a more ordered sense of planning as it related to growth and rampant growth that was not controlled. I think that he brought us far in many areas, and I think the relationship to Bill Cahill is important. I think that Bill Cahill, when he left office since 1974, had faced many of the same problems. One-term governor beaten in his own primary, Jim Florio beaten in the general election, both of whom stood up for what they thought was right, both of whom fought with their own parties and fought with the opposition. And I think that he'll be remembered as a man who did what he had to do and who worked very hard at it and cared. And his legacy will hopefully be a realization that we must lower property taxes in New Jersey, and we cannot allow what happened in the 1980s to continue.
All right, on that note, I have to wrap it up. With the rest of the Florio legacy is up to the historians to judge. Joe Doria, Senator John Bennett, Assembly Speaker Chuck Haytaian, thank you, the three of you, for joining us tonight. I'm Larry Stuelpnagel. Thank you for joining us. Good night.